Okay, I think that's short. Okay, hi to everyone. Thank you for being here. Today with us, we have Bastian Krieger. He is a researcher at ZEW and PhD student at University of Luxembourg, expected to graduate during the next academic year. Today, he will present us his work about local public university research funding and film university corporation. Without any further delay, the virtual floor is yours, Bastian.
Okay, thank you, Georgios, first for the introduction and also, of course, for the organization of the seminar. I'm really happy to present to you today some preliminary results of one of my 3 current projects, which is called Local Public University Research Funding and Firm University Cooperation. The last time I gave this talk was actually already some time ago, and I didn't work on it a lot lately, but I do want to get back to it. However, when I presented it, I did ask my audience a question, which was more feasible because we were meeting live. And I did ask, does anybody in the room know one German university which was in the top 10 leading universities worldwide during the last few years? And actually, nobody knew the answer, and the reason for this is, of course, because this was a rhetorical question. So some people said Heidelberg or Munich, but even those good German universities are still far from the top universities worldwide. And as a result of this, what the German government did, they introduced a huge funding line called the Excellence Initiative in 2006, aiming at making German universities more internationally competitive, especially with regard to research. What I'm using this for today is I want to use the Excellence Initiative as a shock to firms in Germany and how this affects their cooperation behavior with their local and non-local universities. That's the main idea today. Considering the exact research question I'm taking a look at, there's the main research question, which is there actually a negative or a positive relationship between local public university research funding and local firm university cooperations in research and development? However, this is still pretty broad, and I would like to refine it. So we specifically take a look at specific research fundings to universities in different science fields, more specifically in life science, engineering science, and also natural science. Also, besides taking a look at different science fields, I also consider different types of collaboration. So I know about local collaboration with universities or firms. I know about cooperations which are in Germany, but not locally. And I also know about cooperations with foreign universities of German firms. However, what are the actual channels of public university research funding on collaboration? Considering firms, they favor to cooperate with universities which receive public research grants because of the increased, first, ability to hire excellent researchers because they have more funding. Second, their ability to purchase equipment and materials, more of it, and also in a higher quality. And also, of course, of the additional scientific legitimacy and visibility that universities receive as a result of receiving public research funding. However, taking a look at the university researcher side, if they receive public research grants, it's not necessarily the case that they increase their collaboration with industry. It might be the case that they meet the increased demand if they are interested in a collaboration. However, they might also just leave it be if they are already satisfied, or as they are now more financially independent, it could even be the case that they cooperate with private sectors as they do not need the additional money from them. Especially also the last point, some people might say this is actually not important. However, taking a look at German firm level data, we see that for 12% of the firms that would have liked to collaborate, but were not able to. The reason for this was that there was no interest from academia. So this does happen also. However, all in all, therefore, public research grants to universities do have the potential to increase, but also to decrease firm university cooperations. Formal research. The formal research, which is the closest to what I'm trying to do today, is the one that you see down here, like some research of Lennehem et al., Blume-Cout, Deste, Muschio, etc. This is the closest one. Of course, there's a much broader literature on science-industry collaborations. However, that's what I focus on at the moment, and I'm planning to extend my literature search here. However, taking a look at particularly this stream of literature, we can see that there's a consistently positive impact of public research funding on university-industry interactions. That's what those studies find. However, as specifically this literature that we're taking a look at is not too big, further research is needed. Particularly, the literature I'm citing here does not have too much causal evidence, and more of it is pretty desirable. Also, particularly the differences between funding in different science fields should be considered more strongly. Particularly Blume-Cout, I really hope that I say this correctly, by the way, build a model, and they show that public research funding, additional one to universities, can spark additional collaboration, particularly if the science field is more applied, where it might decrease collaboration in science fields that are less applied. Also, which is another thing, is that all of those studies typically take a look at financial numbers. For example, the amount of third-party funding from industry. So they can only see, okay, overall the amount of money increased. However, we do not know anything about the composition of interactions. It is possible, for example, that they changed collaboration partners. It is possible that some collaborations were dropped and others were introduced. So we cannot see this given the studies on the topic at this point in time. This is where I am planning to contribute to. First of all, we take a look at the composition of firm university collaborations. I will take a look at the fact if firms collaborate with local or non-local universities.
Graphics, dashboards, all kind of.
No, go on.
Question?
No, it was not a question. You can go on, but.
Okay. What we also do is we directly compare the impact of funding in different science fields, and we do try to use the Excellence Initiative as a quasi-experiment to actually get some causal evidence here. However, this is pretty tricky. And finally, the Excellence Initiative is a rather big policy tool in Germany, and there wasn't any impact evaluation considering its impact on the private sector. So we also contribute to this stream of literature. And like I said, so far I'm really focused on the main line of research that I want to contribute to, but I will also go further in my further literature research. So to give you a little bit more of an idea of the Excellence Initiative, overall is the initiative allocated to three different funding lines. On the one hand, there are graduate schools, there are excellence clusters, and university strategies. The Excellence Initiative started in 2006, and it was going on until 2017. After that, it was actually removed, and another initiative was introduced, the so-called Excellence Strategy. Graduate schools, the aim of those were, of course, to implement high-level graduate schools at universities, and universities there received an additional funding of 1 to 2.5 million euros per year. Also, overall, around 35 universities received any graduate school funding during the entire period from 2006 to 2017. Just to give you an idea, this is, roughly speaking, a little bit less than half of all, let's say, real public full universities in Germany. Excellence cluster funding focused particularly on funding of basic research. This was also the main aim here. This was additional money, namely 3 million to 8 million euros, which was distributed to research groups at universities to give them additional financial helps to, for example, hire people, but do investments and get materials. Also here, overall 35 were funded during the entire Excellence Initiative. Finally, there's also the so-called university strategy. The university strategy has the largest funding per year of 9.6 million to 13.4 million. And also, universities only were able to receive university strategy funding if they also were able to win a competition in the graduate school contest and the excellence cluster context. Also, it gave the universities the great label of excellent university. This funding, however, was pretty much possible to attribute anywhere. And what I heard from several people at this point, there's no empirical evidence, but it's also a lot of marketing money actually. Here, overall, 14 universities received that funding during the entire initiative. I'm particularly focusing on excellence cluster funding today because I'm interested on the impact of public basic research university funding, not on teaching funding or public funding in general. Excellence clusters in general, first of all, how were they distributed? There was a competition where universities were able to participate. And the criteria were, first of all, and most important, the scientific excellence of the applicants. Second, also the cooperation partners were taken a look at, were considered. Whereas research institutes, other ones were often partners, and also companies, but this only happened in 2 cases with 2 companies, so this can barely be considered. Also, excellence clusters are the most important funding line in the Excellence Initiative. Overall, 2.7 billion euros were attributed there, which made approximately 58% of the total Excellence Initiative funding of Germany. There's also some time variation. Overall, there were 3 rounds. One started in 2006, the second in 2007, and the last one in 2012. You can see that the first 2 rounds were overlapping a little bit. That's not a big issue. Basically, also you can see that the funding round 1 officially went actually to 2011. However, all universities that received an excellence cluster in the first funding round also got a prolongation until 2012. So basically there are 2 different funding rounds rather than 3, which goes from 1 to 6, 2012, and another one from 2012 to 2017. And during the first one, we basically have 37 clusters, and in the second one, 43. There is some variation going on which firms receive clusters, and some clusters are not funded again in funding round 3. However, overall, if you take a look at the university level, there's not a lot of variation here. So universities that receive funding during the first 2 rounds are most probable also receiving funding during round 3. And in general, funding usage was allowed for personal costs, material costs, and investment costs, like already said. Also, that's another important point. Some people say that 6.5 million euros per year is not a lot of money for different departments. However, taking a look at the universities that actually received Excellence Cluster funding and their third-party funding on average between 2001 and 2013, we can see for the different science fields that this additional 6.5 million euros would have made up in life science 90% of this funding in Germany, on average 54% in natural science, and 83% even in engineering science. So there is definitely an amount of money that got distributed there, which is also economically meaningful for the departments. Now we get to the databases we use to answer our questions and a little bit more into what are we actually measuring. So the main database we're using is the so-called Mannheim Innovation Panel. The Mannheim Innovation Panel is the German Community Innovation Survey. The Community Innovation Survey is a yearly survey in some countries only every 2 or 4 years in Europe, which measures the private sector innovativeness of each country. They are on the firm level and really used to calculate the official numbers. The Mannheim Innovation Panel is a yearly survey, and each year there are specific focus questions. Whereas we take a look at some focus questions which consider R&D cooperation with, on the one hand, local German universities, non-local German universities, and foreign universities. So this is our base data on the firm level, and we add additional regional information on it, considering universities and other regional characteristics. Also, besides the R&D cooperation information, whereas we know if a firm did this or not, so these are tier 1 variables, we also have many more firm characteristics which we can use to control for omitted variables. But I will talk more about this in a little bit. Besides the Mannheim Innovation Panel, I'm generating also a university panel on my own. For this, I use several different university data sets in Germany, which is a pain that you need to get all of those different ones and combine them. The most important one is the so-called GEPRIS database. This one is actually the database of the German Ministry of Education and Research, and it includes all the funding information that I need. It gives me the information on which university received excellence cluster funding or other excellence initiative funding and in which science fields. This is where I take this information from. Also, there are other data sets which include the size of the university, if it has a clinic, if it is a technical university, and also the location of it. Currently, I simply combine those two data sets by adding to each firm the information of its closest university. There are other ways to do this, for example, combining the university information in the same municipality as the firm. However, this is the way I'm currently doing it. I'm planning to have more robustness checks, but also there's a good reason why I'm doing this. The reason for this is that for each firm, we know if it cooperates with a local German university, whereas there's no clear definition of local. In some community innovation surveys, they say within 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers. However, in Germany, they just say a local university. Therefore, the approach of just taking the closest university is a more individual approach. So for the firm where the closest university is 50 kilometers away, this must be the local one. Where for firms where the closest university is 75 kilometers away, this is rather the local one. And this definition therefore allows kind of to contribute for that. However, like I said, different definitions need to be controlled for. Finally, I add additional regional characteristics from the so-called Mannheim Enterprise Panel, which is also gathered at the ZEW by our department. It basically covers the entire firm population of Germany, and we do know which firm is within which industry. We also know how much those firms patent, and I tried different things here. However, this is also, everything is super highly correlated there. If we, for example, use a measure like, okay, how many firms in the same industry are around in 10 kilometers? Then it doesn't really make a difference. Do I count the patents of those firms? Do I count the firms themselves? Or for example, even do I count the amount of other research institutes? I did build several measures and they all had correlation coefficients of around 0.95. So to avoid multicollinearity, I just take one of those measures in the coming analysis. Furthermore, we do quite a little bit of data cleaning. Considering our firm panel, we do remove firms that significantly move, whereas I identify significantly moving firms by saying the closest university changed. With this, we want to remove a potential self-selection of firms to universities that receive excellence initiative funding. Also, we remove firms that answer for company groups instead of the current local company building, because then we do not really know, okay, is it the actual firm, the local one that collaborates, or is it the entire company group? Also, what we do remove are firms funded after the introduction of the Excellence Initiative, again, to remove a potential self-selection of firms to the Excellence into the Excellence Initiative. Considering our university panel, we do only consider full public universities, and we drop highly specialized ones, which can barely be compared. There is, for example, a theatrical university in Berlin, which is not really relevant, which can also never receive, at least not really, any Excellence Initiative funding. And also policy and military universities are pretty different. Overall, we then have we have 76 universities in Germany that have those restrictions. And we drop another 2 universities because they merged during the time of our observation period. And we also then drop the firms which are close to those merging universities. To give you a little bit more of an idea how the data looks like and how it's geographically distributed, particularly as you're also focusing on regional economics, this is our map of Germany, and it shows the distribution of the universities we are taking a look at, whereas orange ones are the ones that received funding during the first 2 rounds of Excellence Initiative of the Excellence Initiative competition, whereas the yellow ones did not receive any funding during that time. Or just for you to get an idea of the regional distribution. And this is the regional distribution of our firm level data, where each dot is a firm observation and its location. And one can also really nicely see that this is pretty much similarly distributed, given that they're showing that there are basically big agglomerations going on. I already said that we do have some additional control variables later on. You can see here the descriptive statistics for our first analysis, which covers the years 2014 and 2016. We can see that around 10% of the firms in our sample do have collaborations with regional universities. We see that also around 10% have a collaboration with a non-regional German university, and around 3% have a collaboration with a foreign university. Also, if we can take a look at the distance to the individual universities, which is really important, as we do match them by the closest university, we can see that it can be super close to up to around 190 kilometers. The firm level variables that we will control for later on are the R&D intensity, which is measured as R&D expenditures over R&D revenues, which is super important because generally firms that are more active in R&D are also obviously more probable to collaborate in R&D collaborations. We do also control for public research funding that a firm receives, which is pretty important because it might be the case that a firm particularly wants to collaborate to be able to receive public research funding. We do control also for some regional measures. So East Germany typically is still structurally pretty different than West Germany, so we need to control for this as a big effect. And to control for agglomeration, we also have the firm density, which is the number of firms within the 10-kilometer radius from the MOOC. Even more important than the firm variables, because in general the Excellence Initiative should be pretty exogenous to our firms, however not for the universities. It is important to control for university characteristics. We do see for our sample, so this is now not on the university level, but still on the firm level. However, if we would have the same numbers on the university level, not a lot would change with regard to the means. We can see that around 31% of our firms are close to university which received excellence cluster funding in life science. We see that around 14% are close to a university which received excellence cluster funding in natural science, and around 22% of the firms are close to a university which received engineering science, excellence cluster in engineering science. Furthermore, we control for the other 2 funding lines as control variables, as well as in some interactions, which I will show. Then we control for the general specialization of the university. So we take the values of researchers in life science, in natural science and engineering science before the Excellence Initiative was introduced. So we want to make sure that those are really not related already to the changes of the Excellence Initiative funding. So this is rather a size control and a specialization control, whereas a quality control is the third-party funding per researcher also in those three different science fields. Also, finally, considering the structure of the different universities, we have university clinics. We know if a university has that, and we also know if it's a technical university, which is generally more focused also on knowledge transfer. This much to our data set, and now let's get to what we're actually estimating, because it might have been hard to really see that at this point what we're aiming at here. So first of all, our dependent variable of our firms is if a particular firm participated in an R&D cooperation with a local, a non-local, or a foreign university. So these are our three dependent variables that we're interested in. One can say now, okay, we do match them to the closest university, but we only know if it's a local university. So this is a little bit fuzzy. However, in one wave of the Community Innovation Survey, we do have the actual collaboration partners. And this shows us that firms cooperate 4 times more often with their closest than with their second closest university, and even 8 times more often than with their closest university. Therefore, even so, our measure here is a little bit fuzzy, considering how we measure the treatment and our outcome. However, if I find anything, I argue that it should be rather even than a lower bound. Our variable of interest, where we want to know which effect it does, is our ECI variable. This is a vector considering if a firm received excellence cluster funding, if the closest university of a firm received excellence cluster funding in engineering science, yes or no, in life science, yes or no, or in natural science, yes or no. We do have the actual numbers, but there is so less variations that it doesn't make a difference and we cannot really interpret it. That's why we go here for binary variables. Furthermore, we do control for the distance to the universities. The closer you are, the more influenced you should be of the characteristics of your university, and that's why we also interacted with our excellence cluster dummies. Furthermore, we do control for all the firm level and university level characteristics, which I mentioned before. So this is quite a little bit, I would say, and we do include also time and industry year fixed effects. So we have a dummy for being in the year 2014 or 2016. You might wonder at this point why I start off with having only a look at the year 2014 and 2016. The reason for this is that we do not have information on collaboration with local universities, specifically before 2012. And therefore, I will first show you some correlation of collaborating with the local university, whereas before 2012, we only know if a firm collaborated with a university in Germany. So this measure is even a little bit more fuzzy than the one that we already have. However, here it will still hold that if we find anything, it should be a lower bound of our estimates. And there we then get to causality, where this is right now only correlation. I mean, even so, only correlation we do control for a lot, and the excellence initiative should be by nature mostly exogenous. Generally, in our estimations, all standard errors are clustered at the university level to avoid multiple bias.
Sorry?
Yes?
Bastian, can I ask you something?
Yes.
In the previous slide,
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain me how the variable distance varies over time? I didn't get this point because it's a straight line distance, right?
So yes, I measure it as the crow flies. There is not a lot of variation, but a little bit. So I do remove what I said, significantly moving firms where the closest university changed, but I do have firms where the closest university does not change because it, for example, only moved within a city. But there I get some variation in the distance.
So my question is, the only way this variable has time variation is if a new there is a new university closer to the firm, or I don't understand correct.
The distance changes in time if a firm actually moved from 2014 to 2016. If a firm moved here, then I get some time variation. However, it's still the case that the closest university never changed it because I dropped those universities.
Okay. Thank you.
Firms. No, I did not drop the universities, but I dropped those firms.
Okay, thank
you. Considering the results of the correlations, you can see here on our first row if a firm had an R&D cooperation with a local university, yes or no. We have if a firm had an R&D cooperation with a non-local university, yes or no. And we had if a firm had an R&D cooperation with a foreign university, yes or no. Our first variables of interest are then, does actually receiving an excellence cluster in life science impact the probability of a firm to collaborate with one of those different universities? And we cannot see anything. Not for our main coefficient of interest, neither for the interaction with distance. The same is the case for funding in natural science. We can also find nothing. However, we do find something for receiving an excellence cluster in engineering science. So if the closest university of a firm received an excellence cluster in engineering science, the firm was 8 percentage points more probable to collaborate with a local university. Also, this impact decreases with distance. I think it's around 0 after 15 to 20 kilometers. I need to recall. We cannot find anything on non-local German universities. However, we can also see that the probability to collaborate with a foreign university decreased by 7 percentage points. This actually indicates that it is possible that German firms started to substitute earlier collaborations with foreign universities with now local collaborations with the universities that did receive excellence cluster funding in engineering science. Also, the pattern that we see here fits pretty much to the theory that I introduced right at the beginning. That said, that the more applied a research field is, the higher is the probability that receiving funding in it would increase collaboration with industry. Engineering science is clearly the most applied science field, so finding that here it increased the local collaborations does fit pretty much. At this point, we need to consider, okay, besides excellence cluster funding, there's also funding of university strategies and graduate schools to check if this actually might influence our results. We also include them and also interact them with the distance and also have an interaction between our excellence cluster funding and the university strategies. However, there we cannot find anything. The same is the case for graduate school funding. Here we do it similarly, and we can still see that our impact is pretty much robust, and graduate schools in general didn't matter, whereas also the interaction of receiving excellence cluster funding and funding for graduate schools also was not significant. Also, the triple interaction term, I did not show it here, but that one also is pretty much insignificant and doesn't matter at all. I really hope you can hear me well, because my picture of Georgios is lagging a little bit. Can you give me a short feedback, Georgios?
Fine. Okay.
Probably it's my internet connection, the problem, so don't worry.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that it's rather you than my internet connection. Okay, great. So like I said, so far we pretty much have been looking at correlations, whereas we control for quite a lot. But one of the main contributions is supposed to be that we kind of want to take a look at causality here. And for this, to check for this, we need to consider all of the collaboration data that we have. What you can see here is a timeline of the years where I have cooperation information of individual firms. So I have information in 2002, 2003, and 2004, and here if a firm cooperated with a German university. This is the time before the Excellence Initiative. This is great because I actually have a pre-treatment period here. Then I have overall 2 periods in between, the one and the second round and the third round, where I also have information if there was cooperation with a German university. But unfortunately, only afterwards I can identify collaborations with local universities versus collaborations with non-local universities. However, what is pretty neat is the fact that we did find a significant relationship for regional collaborations, but not for non-regional collaborations in Germany. And therefore, what I argue is that if we find a relationship, a positive and significant one, for collaborating with German universities, this finding must be driven by the local part of this variable. And this allows me then to actually use the entire panel informations that we have with the pre-treatment periods and changes in the treatment, and therefore to use a difference in differences design to estimate causal impacts. What you can see here now is first of all that we establish that we do indeed also find a correlation similar for R&D cooperation with German universities to collaboration with local universities. So what you can see here in the first column is the same regression as before for local German universities and non-local German universities, but now together for collaboration with German universities. And we see the impacted decrease, but here we can actually still find something. So it seems that the argument that I made earlier is feasible, that we find a lower impact, but we do still find something because even collaboration with German universities still holds some local component in it. After establishing this, we repeat our estimations now in a difference in differences design. But what does this basically mean? It's nothing else than that we use our entire panel information, time, fixed effects, and also university fixed effects, where then university fixed effects control for time, independent differences between firms close to different universities. So this is basically then our treatment group, and time fixed effects immediately take into account the treatment timing. Of course, for everybody who follows the current difference in differences literature, it is the case that we assume a constant treatment effect, so that it's the same in every year. However, this is done basically in all past difference in differences analysis. The last line, what we do here is we follow Lechner and do a placebo test. Given that our treatment is really exogenous for our firms, there should not be an impact of the treatment before it was actually introduced. Therefore, in our last column, we only take a look at the years 2002 and 2004 before the introduction of the Excellence Initiative, and we pretend that there were already Excellence Initiative clusters in engineering, science, etc. And we do not find anything. Therefore, this is the first check that, okay, apparently we do solve our potential heterogeneity problem, and we have common pre-treatment trends. Also, I do not show this here, however, in the difference in differences setting, we do not find a negative significant impact on foreign universities anymore. This is the case, even so it was pretty interesting that we find a correlation. I already mentioned the common trend assumption. So this assumption is generally the most important assumption when it comes to difference and differences. It basically means, okay, if a firm would not have received the treatment, it would have developed exactly the same way as the control group. And the most easy way to check for a violation is to take a look at pre-treatment trends. So these are our years before the excellence initiative was introduced. And we have our different groups of firms that received no funding and in the different science fields. And I argue that this is pretty much the same slope, and therefore we can see a common pre-treatment trend, and we do not see a violation of our common trend assumptions. Also, we do check for the changes in R&D collaborations between for the years 2002 to 2003 and 2014 for each one of our groups. So we always compare, okay, how did the mean of collaborating the group of receiving no excellence cluster funding change over the 3 years? How did it change for receiving excellence cluster in life science funding? And then we compare it and if it's significant. We do this also for first life science, then natural science and engineering science. And for none of those, we find that the changes are different. Also, if we would control the 3 different groups also against each other, so for example, excellence cluster in life science versus engineering science, and engineering science versus natural science, we would also find no significant difference in the means. Therefore, this also seems to support that we do have a common trend, and we do actually observe causal effects. And with this, I want to come to my conclusion rather on time if I take a look at the clock. What we do currently find in our, like I said, preliminary findings is that excellence initiative research grants do decrease local collaboration between firms and universities. However, this is only the case for excellence initiative cluster funding in engineering science. Furthermore, there might be a substitution of non-local German, no, there's no effect on non-local German collaboration, but there might be a substitution of foreign university collaborations. This should be further taken a look at. And finally, our test for common pre-treatment trend hold. So this is the first indication for the causal nature of our results, which is great. And however, given our conclusions, it needs to be noted that even if we found nothing, of course, it wouldn't have meant that the excellence initiative would not have worked, because it clearly focused on the research of universities and not on the private sector. So it's interesting that we take a look at this impact and we see that there is more collaboration on the local level and there might be more agglomeration effects. However, it does not say anything about the success or failure of the excellence initiative. Of course, there are many limitations currently still, even more than are listed here. However, just to name a few, yes, we do only take a look at intensive margin. For our outcome variables, we only know yes or no, as well as for our treatment variables, we only do know yes or no. We do not know what was the money actually used for, which would be super amazing because nobody did that so far. If anybody has that, you should do it, I think. Also, we do have some fuzziness, and I argued away. Of course, to get rid of it, I also tried the same analysis with having joint patterns of the specific university and the firm, as well as scientific publications, but there were simply not enough, which was really a pain, which was too bad. And finally, one could still extend it. For example, we see now that some substitution might be going on. However, it could also be the case that there are other substitution effects, for example, with collaborations with other research institutes, which are extra university research institutes, or maybe with firm competitors. However, with this, I'm thanking you very much for your attention. I hope it was interesting. I'm looking forward for your questions and feedback, potentially particularly considering methods. Yes, I'm looking forward.
Thank you very much, Bastian. And we are ready to receive questions or comments, suggestions.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I want to ask you a couple of things. First is they are both related. First, about the persistence in your both dependent and independent variables, in the sense that usually in innovation, we see firms innovating and firms not innovating, right? And there is a lot of persistence in the sense that there is a very few amount of cases in which you see transitions from not innovating to innovating, etc., right? So in this sense, I would have liked to see in your descriptive statistics between within standard deviation or transition probabilities. There is a common in Stata which you can have used. Well, it's called XT-sum. Another one is just for dummy variables called XT-top. Just summarizing the information in this sense, I think is very useful for the reader or for the audience, right? And the second issue related to this is just to assume that firms are heterogeneous in the sense that some innovate, some others don't, some cooperate, some others don't, etc. And that this type of issues might happen because they are different, so a sort of Heckman selection process should be considered in advance. I don't know, I mean, this is the literature in innovation, but my feeling is that, well, I'm not sure if this could be also applied to your case or not, and what are your thoughts on this? I would like to know. Thank you.
Considering your first question, that's a really great question. And I did check particularly for the changes in my dependent variable, because of course collaboration behavior is kind of persistent. I cannot name you the exact numbers, but I looked at it and I thought, okay, this is pretty much good. There is enough variation that I can use, but I should definitely add this to the presentation. Considering the changes in our treatment variable, during our first correlation framework, there's basically no variation. I mean, there's only the variation between the group that is close to one that did receive those cluster fundings and those that did not. Whereas, of course, we do have the entire variation when we then use our panel sample of universities that first didn't have the funding and then received the funding. So we have the variation of 0% of the closest universities receiving the funding to then approximately for around, for example, I think for engineering it was around 20 or so. So there we have more variation on this that we can use. Considering the Heckman selection model, I'm pretty sure that we could use this as an alternative, particularly for our correlation analysis. Here we could do a Heckman selection model and try already to implement causality more here. Something similar was, for example, done in another study. I think it was in the Journal of Technology Transfer with the UK Community Innovation Survey, where they first take a look at exactly what you say, actually. Do firms collaborate with a university? And then they do decide, do they collaborate with regional one or not? So here we could do something similar. Whereas I currently was hoping for that we more or less, as a result of our common trend analysis, can argue that we can control for enough to get rid of our selection and actually implement them kind of causal estimates.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you too.
Are there any more questions or suggestions? Okay, Bastian, I have still some doubts about the distance variable.
Yes.
So if you can go again to the summary statistics of this variable.
Mm-hmm. Also, while I try to open it again. Actually, I would really like to go back. However, my computer is having issues, so maybe just ask the question and I will try to answer.
Yes, I think the variable is in kilometers, if I understand correctly, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if I remember also correct, from the summary statistics, you had some, I don't remember how many, but you had some values below 1, right?
Yes.
So
0.7 was the closest, I think.
Yes. I don't know, maybe when you use the log transformation, maybe you cause some distortions to the data because you have some small values there. I don't know if that is the case. Maybe you can try to use the meters instead of kilometers, which are, and the values are going to be larger, and then you take the log of the variable just as a robustness test. Maybe nothing will change. I mean, I don't know,
yes.
but just as a robustness test, you can also try to do that. And also, a second thing is that you are considering the distance, but maybe you could also use like to compute the cost, like transportation cost, maybe using roads or something else instead of just the distance.
Yes,
I don't know if this is possible, because you have a lot of firms, right? You have like 4,000, so you must calculate 4,000 some different costs. I don't know if it is possible. Maybe it needs a lot of computations, but maybe you can consider roads. And this is the second question about this distance variable.
So yes, you're right. I could use roads, which means a lot of computation, while I at this point didn't do it, particularly because I was wondering if there might be also other ideas than roads, and in the end I would. So in Germany, typically it doesn't really matter, at least according to other colleagues of mine who work a lot on the geographical impacts. Whatever you use, considering their experience, and therefore I thought about, okay, once I hand this in, I'll adapt it to whatever the reviewer would really like to see. But yes, so people typically ask for roads, but so that's a big thing that I potentially should do before. And I do actually have a question potentially where it would be great if no answer, that's also fine. But right now I'm using the closest university, and I'm always struggling if I shall use the closest university, which I really like because of this individual component of what's local for each firm, or if I should just go with labor market regions. And then I have a given region, I take a look at all the universities in this region, and that's it. I would really be interested in what other people think about that. I guess many people will just say to both.
I asked about roads because if you consider, I know that Germany, I saw papers in the last couple of years that explore the effect of high-speed rail in Germany. So I said roads because if you consider high-speed rail, then you probably will find some firms or universities to be very close because of the high-speed rail connection. They will have a very low cost, but this doesn't mean that they are at the same region. I don't know. So that's why I suggested to start with roads as an alternative solution and to see if you have the same regression results as with the distance.
Hi, Bastian. I would also suggest to maybe try the radius, like different radius around the firm, because let's say you're between Mannheim and Heidelberg, maybe you're slightly closer to Heidelberg. So you, in your current approach, you associate the firm to Heidelberg, but maybe the firm starts a cooperation with Mannheim or something like that. Given that they tend to be rather clustered, also universities, maybe the difference is of a few kilometers. So as a robustness check, I would try like different approaches.
Different thresholds, maybe.
Yep. Yes, for this I even already wrote the code, and this this takes a long time. I need to see if I can actually. I tried to run it on my computer with Stata, so there's a create Stata command called geonear and geodis, but I think I cannot rely on Stata for this anymore.
But if you want any help, if you want any help on this, you can always send me an email and we can try something in QGIS.
Thank you for the offer.
So if there are many more suggestions, comments, or questions from the audience. I don't see more. So thank you very much, Bastian, for your nice presentation, and it was a really interesting topic, and it was an honor to have you here with us today. So thank you very much again, and I hope I will see everyone in the next in our next seminar, AQR seminar. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you too. Thank you for the invitation and organization. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.